Psalm 97 is well known for a line that is widely sung. Or zaru Allah tzadik ul yishrei lev simcha. That's verse 11. The light shall be sown for the righteous and for the upright of heart joy. I shared in my introduction to the psalm today about 5 different compositions of that song. It's a line of celebration. Light shall be sown for the righteous, for the upright of heart, joy. And it's sung, many of the recordings are youth groups. There's this quality of looking forward and doing so with celebration. And when I called to speak to Dahlia and Shalom this morning, Rabbi Podwal reminded me of this important midrash. First, a midrash about that line. In Breshit Rabbah 17:5, there is the image. Breshit Rabbah 35:1 alludes to the light of creation. You know, the creation of the first day, there's light. But the sun and moon aren't put up into the sky until the 4th day. And so the question is, what is this light that was created on day 1? And in this early rabbinic commentary, 35:1 of Breshit Rabbah, they say this is the primordial light, the light that got stretched from one end of the creation to the other, that was hidden away for the righteous, or haganuz, hidden away for the righteous in the world to come. And Rabbi Podwal shared with me that this was the first piece of Zohar, that mystical commentary of the Bible, that he learned in Vayihi Or, and It Shall Be Light, with Danny Matt's collection in the Paulus Press of the Zohar. He translates this piece, that this light is the light of Yesod, the emanation of creativity of God that was given to primordial Adam before the downfall of eating the forbidden fruit, when that Adam was surrounded by that light. And in the Zohar, the description that is the light that Moses brought back after Mount Sinai, and explains why Moses needed a mask, because he, having encountered that primordial light of God, the immediacy of God, was reflecting that primordial light. And so this line of Psalm 97, verse 11, Or Zarua Letzadik Ulishrei Lev Simcha, is the line, the only line I really knew by heart in this psalm before I began to read it. We're going to look more deeply at how the rabbis understand that verse, verse 11, and why it's in the singular for tzaddik and in the plural for upright of heart when we get to it. But I want to work through this psalm knowing there's a budget of time, because here too, as in all the psalms, there is, in the Hebrew in particular, such a artfulness of weave. Here's some things to be aware of in this psalm, and that is there's a trajectory. So there's movement in this psalm. There's movement from the heaven, with fire moving down, to Judah and Zion, a particular place, and then to the righteous, a universal God in verses 1 to 9, and then the last 3 lines in particular dealing with the guardian of Israel, or a sense of the righteous more specifically. So there's this sense of movement. And the key image is that of light or fire. In the beginning, it's fire burning up the sinners, and some imagery almost of Mount Sinai, where there was an echo of Mount Sinai in terms of God's revelation with thunder and lightning, the bolts of lightning, and the fire, the mountain erupting. And then that fire becoming light. So by the time we get to verse 11, so what is not so evident, of course, in an English translation is that there is in this psalm a flipping back and forth between past tense and future tense. You know, in the Bible, there's only two tenses. There's perfect, which is present past, and imperfect, which is present, future, and jussive. Jussive, led us. And so in this psalm, often it's simplified to be simply present tense. And here's the paradox. This psalm, Psalm 97, is a psalm that leads to rejoicing. Verse 11, the light for the righteous. There's joy. This psalm has this paradox of it's a psalm the rabbis understood that will be sung in the future, in the time of redemption. And yet, the grammar is shifting back and forth between past, present, and future, if you will. So embedded in the grammar itself, which I do try to convey in my translation, is this movement. And so although it's a psalm meant to be sung in a quality of static goodness in the future, in the psalm itself, there is constant movement. And with that, hopefully I won't freeze again. Psalm 97. And there's two parts. It's basically 1 to 9, the universal God, with 8 being a bridge, and then 10 to 12, God focusing in a more particular way on the righteous. And one other key theme to point out to that's embedded in this psalm, a recurring theme, and that's God's justice. That's what's being celebrated. Is God a just God? Light is sown for the righteous. Psalm 97. Adonai reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let the many isles rejoice. Cloud and fog are around God. Righteousness and judgment are the foundation of God's throne. Fire goes before God and flashes flame around God's foes. Having illumined our God's lightning bolts the world, having seen and trembled the earth. Mountains like wax were melting before Adonai, before the supreme of all the earth. The heavens having declared God's righteousness, and all the peoples have seen God's glory. Let them be ashamed, all who serve Pesel, graven image, who praise themselves with gods, with idols, Be'elilim. They will bow down to God, all, quote, gods. Zion has heard and will rejoice, and the daughters of Judah will express gladness because of your judgments, Adonai. For you, Adonai, are most high above all the earth. You are exalted above all, quote, gods. Lovers of Adonai hate evil. Guardian of the soul of God's devotees, from the hand of the wicked, God saves them. Light is sown for the righteous, and for the upright of heart, joy. Rejoice, righteous ones in Adonai, and acclaim for remembrance God's holiness. And so, as we move through this psalm, key motifs: God is king. Adonai reigns. This again is one of those psalms. It's the third psalm sung each Friday night as part of Kabbalat Shabbat. The third day, that's the day in which earth emerges and vegetation and trees emerge on the third day. And the rabbis comment in terms of these psalms, like this psalm, which acknowledges God as king, that complete creation is now completed as we move toward Shabbat, in terms of the lineup of Psalm 95 onward. And we are crowning God with our words. We are weaving, another midrash, our prayers create the crown of God. And so here in Kabbalat Shabbat, every Friday night, we crown God with our prayers by proclaiming Adonai reigns. And the mood as we move toward Shabbat is that of celebration. God as creator. And in this psalm, that quality of the entire earth being glad, Iyim Rabim, many isles rejoice. There the notion is that all stretches of the earth, even the islands, this isolated, distant parts of creation, all the more from a point of view of singing this in the temple. So as the crowd gathers in Mount Zion, which will be mentioned later in the poem, there's the sense that the God we are praying to is the God of far-flung places, not just this place of God's temple. Cloud and fog are around God, verse 2, Anan va'arafel. That is suggestive Deuteronomy 4:11, a description of God and the tabernacle. Or even Mount Sinai, where the cloud moved in. Arafel, I translate as fog. Art Scroll, dense darkness. Richard Levy, a thunderhead. There's the sense of something added to Radak to protect God's mystery, or as a source of potential threat. And now again, verse 2, what is the nature of God? Tzedek u mishpat. Tzedek, righteousness, or justice. Justice, tzedek. Mishpat is the execution of judgment or of law. And that will reappear. This word mishpat will come back in the psalm, as will the word tzadikim. So here, this is what defines God, tzedek, and a person who is righteous, who reflects godliness. That's that verse again of Or Zarua Litzadik, light shall be sown for the righteous, those who reflect this core quality of God. And this core quality of God is the very foundation, the base of God's throne. And now God executes judgment. Fire goes before God and flashes flame around God's foes. Having illumined are God's lightning bolts. This again is a Canaanite image of Baal, who is the God who executes power with lightning bolts. So there's a little bit of this under the surface, or if you will, this archetype of the power of God over the world. And here, the world is animated. This quality in these Psalms of a world that is alive with consciousness of God's presence, seeing and trembling. We'll pick up in tomorrow's Psalm in particular, Psalm 98, with many metaphors of a world dancing before God. And here, verse 5, mountains like wax were melting before Adonai, before the supreme of all the earth. And again, this could be a reference to Mount Sinai, verses 3 to 5, and God making known God's qualities of justice, or it could be sung in a future time looking back about the final judgment that will allow a world finally to be in harmony and redeemed. And the rabbis in between will sometimes treat these outright like metaphors. So mountains like wax, Ibn Ezra will define as arrogant rulers. Radak, likewise, quoting Micah 1:4, where this is used as a metaphor. So mountains are those who are arrogant, who hold themselves up to be above all else. And so in reading Psalms, and again, this will be a key theme tomorrow's analysis, how much of this poetry do we read as metaphor, and how much do we read as a description either of the animation quality of nature or a future time in nature? Verse 7, let them be ashamed. Who's to be ashamed? Those who serve graven images, pesel, who praise themselves with idols. This word we saw earlier in Psalms, elilim, which Robert Alter in his commentary calls paltry pseudo-gods, because elilim implies small. Richard Levy will translate as godlets. I choose to use the word idols because what is particularly meaningful to me about the word idols is, one, it's an obsession within the Bible. Right after the 10 Commandments, God will say in the Torah reading of last Shabbat, beware you do not have false images before you. And Abraham Joshua Heschel in more contemporary times explaining that what is an idol whenever a means becomes an end, so that power or money become idols when they are seen as the ultimate pursuit rather than simply a vehicle. They will bow down to God, all gods. And in verse 7 and 9, you get this Elohim referring to the idols, the small g gods. Within the middle between these two, the middle between verses 7 and 9. 7, let them, referring to the idol worshippers, and 9 referring to the real God who is exalted. You have in between, kind of purposefully sandwiched, a shift now. And the shift is to Zion and Judah. Zion is the mount on which the temple is located, sometimes a synonym for Jerusalem. And Judah is the tribal area, the larger expanse of which David comes, the tribe of Judah. And here, literally, it's daughters of Judah. Commentaries will explain this as referring to all other cities in Israel, for all are ultimately but daughters of the supreme city of Jerusalem. Others will understand the daughters as inhabitants of, so inhabitants of Judah, though one more recent commentary, that Chazat Sion, will say, since David will be the Messiah, the daughters of Jerusalem are his relatives, celebrating David's arrival. And now the shift to a more focus on God's devotees and how they will rejoice. Here, there's again a purposeful construction. 10a and 12 address the righteous. Lovers of Adonai hate evil, rejoice, righteous ones. 10b and 11 describe the reward for the righteous, and that is the souls will be saved and light will be sown, upright in joy. And so let me read these 3 verses and then parse a little bit of verse 11, of which there are, again, so many melodies and so much commentary. Lovers of Adonai hate evil. Guardian of the souls of God's devotees. From the hand of the wicked, God saves them. Light is sown for the righteous, and for the upright of heart, joy. Rejoice, righteous ones, in Adonai, and acclaim for remembrance God's holiness. And it's pointed out now with verse 11 that tzaddik is singular and ushre lev simcha. And I'm going to add later, for the upright ones of heart, joy. In the Talmud, they'll say in Ta'anit that these are Ta'anit 15a, that the tzaddikim are the ones who are drawn and have a relationship with God. They get light. The upright of heart are the ones who have a relationship with other people of goodness, and that relationship leads to joy. And so you can gain your illumination as an individual, but joy in this context is the joy that comes with being upright heart within community. So that's a play just in terms of pointing out the shift from the singular to the plural. This verse, Or Zarula Tzaddik L'Shrei Lev Simcha, is noted in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the 19th century Ashkenazic of the Chafetz Chaim commentary, to be sung before Kol Nidre. And so you'll find in many machzors, Or Zarula Tzaddik L'Shrei Lev Simcha, verse 11, is chanted multiple times on Kol Nidre before the singing of the gathering for prayer on the first night of Yom Kippur. This verse will also be recommended in the Shulchan Aruch to be recited if you have trouble falling asleep at night. For indeed, there's a quality of quiet joy to anticipate that emerges from this psalm. Well, to point out some of the techniques here, the verses 1 to 9 are the first unit. The entire psalm has as its frame the word Yud He Vav He, verse 1, the opening word, and here in verse 12. It'll appear 6 times, Yud He Vav He, in the psalm, and the pronoun he for God will occur 8 times, equaling 14, 2 times 7. And again, numerology is very important in the Bible and by extension in the composition of a poem. The doubling of God's name, or addressing God 14 times directly, is an expression of wholeness. The word haaretz, earth, that is also in verse 9 and verse 1, and that's that first segment. And so the inclusio is the land, in this case, the whole earth. This is the universal God, verses 1 to 9. And the other key word is yismechu, to rejoice, which you'll find in verse 1 and verse 8, as well as verse 12. So each part of this organization of the psalm is highlighted by this word simcha, but also the word tzadikim, the righteous, which are mirroring tzedek, righteousness in verse 2. Last comment, Al Kol Elohim, who is exalted, no, at the very end, V'hodu l'zecher kodsho, I translate and acclaim for remembrance God's holiness. First thing to know is that usually it's simplified, and that is, and praise God's name. That's how it's widely translated, which is hodu can either mean acclaim, praise, or thank. And another common theme in the Psalms is that what God seeks is our recognition, that God seeks a relationship with the righteous. That God, this is God as creator. God is not the immovable mover. God in the Bible is a God of feelings, of pathos, who longs for praise. It's a remarkable image, but that's the biblical image constantly repeated. And so the trajectory here is that God creates a world, a God of justice who executes judgment, to enable those who reflect God's justice, the righteous, to celebrate and to use their celebration to praise God. There's a difference, by the way, between gratitude and praise. Gratitude is saying, thank you, what you did for me. Praise is, wow, what a remarkable world. There's less ego. And I shared with you this beautiful commentary of the Chabad Rabbi Shneur Zalman, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said, why is it light is sown for the righteous? What is this? It could have just said, hidden is the light for the righteous. Why is it sown? Why the planting imagery? And he said, because the image is like a seed that has an outer shell that needs to, if you will, fall away for the plant to take root. So our ego is our outer shell, and we experience and are able to take in the light of God when we let go of ego. And then we are able to experience that primordial light, which is where we started our presentation, the light of the Zohar, the light of creation of day one, and to feel that light. And in doing so, to always be aware of its source, which is God's holiness. And God's holiness is often presented as light, a light that allows for illumination, to see, wisdom, to be surrounded by God's light, which is protection and warmth, and fire to protect against those who would deny God and deny justice in the world. And so with that as a talking through the power and beauty of Psalm 97, one closing comment, and I do see my wife's cousin, David Lang, and now that we're promoting David a week from today, I see David and smile, because one of the things that this psalm conveys is the need for music. And there's a lot of commentary about that in reference to this psalm. You'll see it again tomorrow as well. And that is to experience and express the light is to do it beyond words. And to go beyond words means to do it with music. And that becomes both the vehicle of expression and the vehicle of receiving the joy. And so some reactions or comments to Psalm 97 for a few moments before we give Dalia and our beloved Rabbi Shalom a chance to say a few words. Alex, go ahead.
Just want to comment on verse 7. Hamid Halelim Elilim.
Yes.
Does that mean that those who worship godlings are basically just worshiping themselves?
So I'm so glad you're focusing on that, Alex. Let me read the verse that Alex is pointing to. And again, an unusual Hebrew construction. So the English, as I translate it, let them be ashamed, all who serve graven images, who praise themselves with idols. They will bow down to God, all gods. Or if you will, all gods will bow down to God with a capital G. And in the Hebrew, umit halalim, which here is who praise themselves, is a reflexive. So hallel, right? That means praise. But here it's hamit halalim. So it's a construction in the plural and reflexive, which means that they're praising themselves with God. So here is another translations. This is by Rabinovitz and Slatovitz. They exalt themselves through gods. The image that I have, and why I love this question, Alex, and you're pointing to Hamitalalim. If you think about gods with the small g as power or money, to make it more contemporary, they're praising themselves with, look how much power I have. Look how much money I have. They're using that which they worship to extol themselves. So in that one word, by being put into the plural, because it's gods, it's more than one, right? These are polytheists. They have many different sources of worship or targets of worship, and it's all about themselves. And that's simply by adding the tough, that one letter, which makes that word reflexive. It's self-oriented.
Yeah.
So again, that's the power and the beauty of having the time to unpack these Psalms together, is that for the Hebrew poet, there is this richness in the choices that are made. Another comment or question? Irene, go ahead.
Do you have fog in South California?
Yes, we live, Irene, near the ocean, and we have something remarkable where we live in Orange County, and that is for much of the year, in the morning, off the Pacific is thick fog, and it burns off, like in the summertime, it burns off in the course of the day. It's true right now. Right now, it's kind of hazy outside, and by the afternoon, it'll probably be very sunny. And it's almost as if the fog is rolling in every morning and cleaning the air around us. And so we definitely, Irene, live with thick fog. But this word, arafel, in verse 2, cloud and fog around God, I chose to keep it simple and just do fog. But translations will be a deep darkness. I mentioned, thunderhead. But the image for me is that the cloud is up here and fog is being in the middle of the cloud. That's what fog is. And so again, above the tabernacle is the cloud of God, but Moses enters into the cloud, if you will. When he goes into the sacred meeting place, he's entering into the fog. Fog, again, to preserve God's mystery. And cloud and fog are around God. Verse 2, righteousness and judgment are the foundation of God's throne. So I love, again, this tension between God's obscurity, his being in the fog, and yet the solidity of what he represents, what his throne is. It's a throne that is on the base of righteousness and judgment. And again, I keep emphasizing this because what I'm moved by as religious poetry is that Psalms sees this need for justice as the essential nature of creation to unfold and to be celebrated. That governments, and often, again, these are lines of kings. This particular psalm, by the way, is not given an attribute. And you might remember back at Psalm 90, that was the only psalm attributed to Moses. Well, in the classical commentary, the next 10, meaning 11 Psalms, are actually written by Moses, like Psalm 97, but pointing to redemption, to the future time of the Messiah, when this will be sung in fullness. Last comment or question, and then I'm going to turn it over to our honorees. Anybody else for today? Tanner Shula, go ahead.
Just a little comment on verse 11, or
Yes.
Zaru al Tzaddik. I immediately flashed back to Tzaddik Katamar Yifrach.
Yes, Psalm 92.
Yes, and just have to say how much I love the fact that the psalmist seems to gravitate so often in describing a tzaddik with imagery from planting and things that are growing. The or, the light is the seed, and with that seed of light, the tzaddik will blossom like a palm tree. So it is just a beautiful thing to behold that is a chosen imagery so often. And I think what it does, it places the tzaddik very much inside God's embrace as a partner in God's being holy and a creator.
I love that. So I'll just free associate to that to pull it together. This is still the time. This is just after the time of the mourning of Rabbi Abraham Twersky. And I brought him to mind last week, as last week was Shiva for him. He, more than anyone I know, was really living the life of a tzaddik in terms of caregiving to the lowest rung of society, alcoholics, and doing it really selflessly. And what I didn't convey enough is his own lightness of being, meaning he had a quality of a twinkle in his eye and a transparency of person that created a sense of lightness, of joy that was present with him. And so for the tzaddik, there is the sense of this light that comes through, a quality of transparency that is a part and parcel of nothing needs to be hidden because of integrity, of living a life that is deeply rooted, back to Psalm 92, Shula, and the palm tree, deeply rooted in values and drawing back to Psalm 1, the light that is under the ground that allows the righteous to thrive. And with that, Rabbi Podwal and Dahlia, a closing comment about today's psalm or the joy of psalms before we recite Kaddish. You have to unmute. There you go.
Ellie, thank you. You mentioned my many years of serving in the rabbinate. That's why after serving so many years, it's such a pleasure for me to sit back in your congregation and to listen to your wonderful teachings. It has been such a pleasure for us. One note I wanted to mention about my Dahlia, in 2010, we got a beautiful honor. She was chosen by the Chicago Jewish News as one of the 10 most influential Jews in the Chicago area. And in terms of the teaching, I just want to read the last couple of lines from that Danny Matt translation. And everywhere that Torah is studied at night, one thread-thin ray appears from that hidden light and flows down upon those absorbed in Torah. And since the first day, it has never been fully revealed, but it plays a vital role in the world, renewing every day the act of creation.
Well, thank you very much for this honor. It's very heartfelt. I appreciate it very much, and I love this psalm and this cluster to be part of Psalms, or this cluster from 95 to 98, which has so much to do with singing and simcha, and how many words of joy, of simcha, v'tagelna. It's very uplifting. I find it very uplifting. And if I have a second to give you something that happened to our community when we were in Chicago, my choir in our school, we had a joint choir, met with other choirs in the area of various religions. And our wonderful music director did a beautiful job in this very peppy Or Zarua. And it was so wonderful that everybody stood up and there were people shouting hallelujah at the end. And it still brings such tears to my eyes to see that. So thank you very much for being included in this Or Zarua Tzaddik.
Well, thank you, Dalia. Thank you, Shalom. You add so much by your presence and now by your words to our being together. Good to honor you as we now enable the honoring of loved ones through the reciting of Kaddish. I invite you to join if you have a loved one that you are so honoring. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah v'alma divra kirutei v'yagdiv malchutei b'chayecho u'yomecho uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei barach le'olam me'olamaya. Yitarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shebei kudshah b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemayim v'chayim aleim v'kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Thank you all for joining this morning. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Psalm 98, Let Mountains Sing Joyfully. And again, a week from tomorrow, a different time, 12:30, an opportunity to spend time with David Lang, who's always great company, and to hear his composition for Psalm 101. Have a great day. Be well.